Hello everybody, this is Big Bear, Tony Sandoval again. I wanted to just touch on IPM again, Integrated Pest Management. I touched on it earlier in a video or two, but IPM is very important to beekeeping. Started back in the 70s. The idea for using integrated pest management essentially is to prevent or eliminate the use of toxic pesticides. Pretty plain and simple in terms of the goal. We don't want the unnecessary use. Okay. Nobody in their right mind has been trained properly and educated properly. The pest control research, anybody will tell you that toxic pesticides do have a place in an IPM plan, but they are a last resort if at all needed. A properly implemented IPM plan works to prevent those things from having to be used. It essentially starts with identification. Know what your problems are. Know what your pests, your poisons, your pathogens, your diseases, etc., your predators. Know what those are when you get into beekeeping. Know how to deal with them. What are the things that stop them, prevent them from coming in? What can interrupt their presence where you're at? And if you can use prevention and intervention at the right times, you won't even need to get to the point where you're having to use toxic pesticide treatments because things haven't gotten out of hand enough. You didn't let them get out of hand. And sometimes, life happens, things happen. And, we have to go to that point, but not always, not nearly as much as we do now. We start with identification. We start with setting what's called thresholds. There's two kinds of thresholds. There's an economic threshold and there's a treatment threshold. That's basically when you sit down on paper and you've identified and learned what are your potential problems. What can you do? What steps can you take to prevent those problems? What steps can you take for early intervention in those problems? And you figure out a timetable. When am I going to implement these things? At what point? Preventative measures, obviously we're using to before those things happen. We want to keep them from happening. Preventative measures are things like screen bottom boards. There's actually 7 categories, roughly, of types of controls that we can use. I'm trying to go off the top of my head. You have your biological, you have physical, there's chemical, of course, regulatory, making rules. Sometimes just simply having certain rules and processes, procedures in place can help with prevention and intervention. Mechanical, you're talking about environmental methods and measures. I don't know if that was how many that was. I lost track, but you get the idea. There are multiple ways, multiple features we can implement prevention and intervention in and around a beehive to prevent, intervene, and not have to get to the point of using toxic pesticides. Those should always be our last resort. And based on our timeline, our thresholds, a treatment threshold is basically saying, okay, when we first see these signs, certain signs, okay, very first time, for example, we do a we do a test for mite presence, varroa mite presence. Say you're using screen bottom drops, okay? So you put your screen bottom board, the board with the squares underneath of there. You coat it with some vegetable oil or something. Put that down there. Maybe you do a sugar shake over them. But basically 72 hours, and then you do a drop. That's your drop period. So after 72 hours, you come back and you count how many mites are in each square. Based on that, you do a little bit of math and you decide, hey, there's too many mites. We need to do something. Hopefully you're testing frequently enough so that you catch it before you get to the point where there's way too many mites. You want to catch it where we watched it go from not really too many, tolerable, to no, now we're creeping up to it's intolerable. How many mites is that? We decide, is that 3 mites per square? Is that 4 mites per square? Is that 5 mites per square? 7 mites per square? We find out. When we set that number, that is our treatment threshold. At that point, we're going to do something, take some action to do something about that. Okay? An economic threshold, that's usually when we start having to look at using stronger methods, because now we're risking losing the farm, so to speak. We're at, right now, say, okay, we're already, looking at a 10-15% loss of, bees or honey or whatever. We can sustain that, we can live up to that, but the problem is going to get worse, and at 20% it's untenable. So we say 15%, say 10%. 10%, or for your economical value, is when we say, okay, I can't let it get past 10%. We cannot afford to let it get past 10%. So at that point, we have to take stronger action. Okay, in which case you may start looking at certain chemical treatments, or at least stronger non-toxic treatments. It all goes to where you're at. And if you've done your homework and you have some adequate resources available to you, you can find those. This session right now isn't to go into all the details, but it's to give you an idea of what is an IPM plan. What does integrated pest management plan set you up to do? And of course, it helps you plan. It helps you be ready. And the better prepared you are, the more successful you're going to be. So, keeping that in mind, we hope we never have to get to the point of sticking a toxic pesticide inside the hive to kill the mites and potentially killing bees. If not killing them, maybe not outright killing them, but maybe damaging them. We don't want to do that if we don't have to. Why risk it? There was a little bit of a problem with certain strips to treat against mites, and they found that in certain circumstances you could put these strips in there and they would kill the mites, but they were, while not immediately killing the bees, they were causing damage to the queens. And so it required a modification in the treatment. Instead of putting a full treatment in, you had to put a partial treatment in and settle for not 100% efficacy, but a 70 to 80% efficacy on that treatment. Because to go beyond that, to do more than that, now you're causing severe problems with your queens and your bees. No queen, you got no bees. So it really, you have to got to do the footwork, got to do your homework, be prepared. And in your hives, you want your hives to be healthy as they can be. You don't want to become a part of the problem. Okay? So consider IPM planning. You should be doing that when you're setting up your apiary plan. When you decide what kind of apiary, am I doing production? Am I doing a brood yard, a breeding yard? Am I doing split yard? Is it just an out yard to take my swarms and splits to? I mean, what is the purpose of the apiary? And when you find out what your purpose is for the apiary and the hives in that apiary, you can set your IPM plan according to its purpose. And that helps you be a little more specific, a little more directed into how far you're willing to go in treatment, depending on what's got to be done in that yard. It could be more sensitive yard where you're dealing with more brood rearing and all that. You really want to limit exposure to toxic pesticides in that area, that category. Then even say a production yard where your big thing is production of honey. Those bees are adults. If you really got a good sized operation going and you've got multiple out yards, you've got breeding yards out and away, so that your production yards are full of bees who have proven themselves. These are genetic lines that have shown they're capable of surviving with minimal attention, and they're capable of the highest production, without being babysat a lot. They're hygienic. They're big foragers. They store well. They're defensive enough to keep parasites and predators out, but at the same time, they're not so defensive as to be aggressive and be a pain in the butt for you to manage. So your production yard should be able to take a little bit more before it's not as sensitive as a breeding yard, where you're always when you open it, you're dealing with more brood and open brood and all that. So you want to take into consideration your apiary, its purpose, and how you adapt your plans to the purpose of those apiaries. That to me is one of your more significant ways to impact how successful you're going to be in your overall annual planning, because it also, again, it determines, what am I going to do at this time of the year? At this time of the year, I should be testing. At this time of the year, I should be setting these preventions in place. At this time of the year, we should be, if this, then that, and you have your little structure, your little breakdown, kind of an engineer's, plot out chart, graph there, and if this, then that. And you start ready at given times. This is the time of year that these pests show up, and so be ready just ahead of that. Being prepared. It's all about being prepared. The better prepared you are going into the year. A lot of people think that winter is just, that's my time to kick back. There's not a lot going on with the bees. Check on them once a month. Go out there, make sure they got enough food, and la-di-da, maybe work on a little bit of hardware, woodenware or something, and pretty much you're taking it easy. But I can keep just as busy in the winter, sometimes even busier, getting prepared for the following spring. I'm working on hardware. I'm assembling new. I'm repairing old hardware, woodenware, fixing boxes, putting together boxes. I'm refurbishing frames. I'm planning out. I'm sitting down and, got the calculator out, and I'm looking, okay, I'm going to have this many hives, and I plan to have this many hives in this place and that many hives in that place, and I'm going to use this apiary for this purpose, so I'm going to need X number of, these pieces of equipment to do that. I need Y number of pieces of hardware or woodenware for that apiary, for the number of hives in that apiary, and, so I got to build those, and all that stuff happens in the winter and early spring, so that I'm ready for when the spring comes. I'm not just, you can't sit idle. It's part of your planning. And an apiary plan starts when you're doing that. The first thing you're doing is it all ties together. Because you're planning. Well, I'm going to implement this prevention of my IPM plan at this time when I'm inserting these pieces of equipment. Okay, now you have your apiary plan and your IPM plan in sync. These things are happening, and you're preparing for those things simultaneously, so that you're not having to catch up one or the other later. Okay, that's a big part of it. So consider your IPM plan. Consider using IPM. The worst thing I can possibly think of, and again, this is my opinion, and I believe it's an opinion that's shared by quite a few people, but I know also that there are a lot of people out there, conventional beekeepers, who will say contrary to this. But if they'll tell you, hey, no, what, we already know this chemical will kill them and keep them killed for 3 months in a row if you apply it at this time. So why waste your time doing anything else? Just put it in the hive whether they've got the mites or not. because if it ain't killing the mites, it's keeping them out, and just call it a day. Put it in and call it a day until the next time you got to apply it. IPM was designed to prevent that kind of behavior. You're implementing, you're putting in a toxic chemical. The idea of doing exactly that kind of treatment is why IPM exists. We can use that toxic chemical when it's necessary, if it's necessary. But just to throw it in there just because, that's unnecessarily exposing bees to something that could potentially harm them. Why risk it just to allow yourself to be a little, I don't know, lazy, or, I don't think everybody who does that is being lazy, but it's convenient for sure. Just to gain yourself a little convenience, you're exposing even a small amount of risk. If it's unnecessary, Now if you're a commercial operator and you're talking, hey, I got 4,000 hives, IPM becomes more difficult and more expensive to implement. Okay, but I'm not talking about commercial guys. I'm not a commercial beekeeper. I've helped to do it. I know guys who do it. It's a whole different scale and world of beekeeping that I'm not going to sit in judgment on. I'm not going to, even really get too deep into discussing, because it's just a whole different thing, whole different scale of beekeeping. But for your small scale, your middle scale, home bee hobbyists, you can definitely use an IPM plan and have it be successful and not be too expensive or inconvenient with a little extra planning on your part. And so I ask you to consider establishing an IPM plan. Just keep it in mind, we don't want to unnecessarily cause harm when we ultimately mean to do well. I don't know of anybody that, everybody wants to do well, they mean well, but like the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That ultimately means we're responsible. Whether we meant well or not, we still did it. We did the bad idea. We know we could have done better, but, well, it's better than doing nothing, some people might say. Maybe, maybe not. Why risk it if you have another option? If it means getting yourself up and out, moving around, an extra couple of days a month versus letting yourself kick back and not do much, helping you to avoid that, then, in my opinion, just my 2 cents, I'm saying go for it. Be extra, a little more busy those couple of days. It's worth it to you. It's worth it to the strength and success of your bees. So anyway, that's what I've got for today. And if you have any questions for me, you want to get my take on something, for whatever it's worth, I'll be more than glad to speak to it, to I don't know, maybe tell you a story about it, sing a song about it, whatever it takes. I'm here to help you. I'm here to become a better beekeeper. I learned, I hear you guys, you email me and you post back on my Facebook and Google Plus things, so I get to hear all kinds of neat stories, and I'm learning back from you just as much. So it's really become a mutually beneficial interaction, me doing these videos. I really appreciate all the feedback I've been getting. It adds to my own, I get to do more. I get to know more and learn more because of you guys. So feel free. And if I can be of help, I'll give it my best shot. All right, folks. This is Big Bear. And enjoy your bees.